And then we were just, everyone was screaming at the boat, obviously, which can't hear us. What are you doing? Why are you
Yeah.
turning? Why are you heading this direction? Because actually, it would have missed us. And that's one of those things, hindsight. Maybe if we wouldn't have called out, it wouldn't have tried to turn and tried to pass us on the port side. But that large 600-foot plus tanker hit us right in square astern on the port side.
Ugh.
And so I was right there, and right before it hit, I just couldn't believe that this was happening. That I'm about to get nailed by a tanker on this 54-foot boat.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. In the United States, there are about 15.2 million hunters. That's how many hunting licenses we sell in the country. And they spend around $21 billion per year, which breaks down to an average of $2,800 per hunter. Now, we need to be really smart about how we spend that money. You can't spend it on stuff that's going to break. Otherwise, you have to buy something else again, and you end up costing yourself even more. We also need to be smart about how much weight we carry in our packs, because that's a serious limiting factor. One way to remove about 5 pounds out of your pack without sacrificing your ability to find animals is to get rid of your spotting scope and tripod. Now, there's a time and a place for those things, and I carry both of them a lot. But if I need to go lightweight, I'm going to carry stabilized binoculars. And the best stabilized binoculars I have ever used are from Sig Sauer. They are the Zulu 6, and they just came out with a new pair called the Zulu 6 HDX. I use the 12 power magnification model. They weigh 21.5 ounces, and they have 2 modes of stabilization. So you throw the lever forward once, and that's going to stabilize the image. If you turn it off and turn it back on again, that's going to stabilize it even more. And I'm not kidding. It is more stable than if you're glassing from a tripod. It is absolutely incredible. You're going to be able to see stuff at just incredible distances and really break it down. Like, you're going to be able to tell the difference between a Billy and a Nanny mountain goat at a mile. You're going to be able to actually see if there's a kicker coming off that 4x4 muley that just popped up over the hill. They work great at early and last light. They work great at highlight. They fit really well in my hands. This was one of the first products that I asked Sig to make when I started working with them. And to no surprise, they were already on it. They were way ahead of me. But this is a really good piece of gear. I highly encourage you look into it. You can go to sigsauer.com, look for the Zulu 6 HDX. Comes in a few different magnification settings, but the one that I like the best is the 12 power. Check it out. So there was a Roman poet named Ovid. That's what we call him. He had, of course, a long Roman name. And he wrote that someone who has experienced shipwreck will look upon a calm sea and shudder. Is that you today?
It isn't. After a shipwreck, after the event that we went through, I wanted to make sure and get back out on the water as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I had heard a similar, old saying, a Greek, I think it's of Greek, not of Roman origins, but talked about when you go through something like that, the sailor, once you go through, shipwreck out at sea, you're gonna take your paddle, your oar, and you're gonna go to land, and you walk as far as you can until no one recognizes what you have in your hand, and that's where you stay.
Yeah, that's how you become a farmer in the mountains.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, seafaring is such an important part of human history. I think that the boat has more to do with our movement around the world, with our development as a species, as does the knife or fire or almost anything else. I've talked about it before, but the dig site over here at Graves Creek on the Salmon River, the deepest they got before they canceled that project was 16,000 years ago.
Wow.
And they found a hearth, so a burn spot where there was a campfire. They found some wolverine jaw bones. They found some spear points at that level. The closest spear points that they could find to those come from Japan, right? So we grew up with this Clovis first theory of people coming across the Bering Sea, getting trapped in Beringia for X number of thousands of years, and then coming south as the Cordilleran ice sheet melts. However, we know that people were moving around in boats before that, and there's a good chance that along that ice that was formed all the way across the Pacific Ocean, that there was going to be a lot of abundance of life along that ice sheet. And then the same thing occurs on the East Coast, and there's some developing theories about people coming across sea ice from France to the East Coast there. But we've been moving around in boats for a long time.
We've been moving around on boats for a long time. The voyage that I was on was in 2009, and I think a few years after that, or maybe before, they started finding boats at the bottom of the Indian Ocean and other places off the coast of Africa that were trading, from East Asia to Africa up into the Mediterranean, from 8th century, 7th century. I mean, and that's just what we know. And
Right.
they had clay, they had pottery in there, and of course other traded goods
And those are
um,
just the boats that are built in a way that they can survive being shipwrecked and lay on the bottom of the ocean.
right.
You know, the earliest boats probably would have been either, dugouts or burnouts or skin on frame boats that, they would have been gone in a season after they wrecked.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I lived in Hawaii for a little while, and I had some friends that lived in Kahana Bay on the east side of Oahu, and they found they're out there with some other paddlers one day and just kind of messing around and diving down, and they found this giant rudder, and it wasn't a Polynesian rudder as well,
Wow.
and it was, and they had someone take a core sample of it, and they found it was a pine.
No
And
kidding.
so they don't know when. Obviously, there was, more happening there before we know as well. So whether that was, the Hawaiians that had got that up in Alaska, I think they said that it was a pine that could be up in our part of North America,
Hmm.
up here in the Pacific Northwest of Alaska, or it could have come from Scandinavia.
Yeah. How anyone ever made it to Hawaii blows my mind. We think of Hawaii now as just a destination, and much has been unfortunately forgotten about the native Hawaiians. But I mean, it is the most remote island chain in the world, and there's such an abundance of life and diversity of all the flora and fauna there. It's so incredible to me that anything could ever make it there. And there's all these little tiny birds that you think, well, there's no way that you could have ever flown this distance, but maybe it wasn't little when it got there and it just evolved later on. But people have only been in Hawaii, as far as we know, for a couple thousand years, to my
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and just yeah, wings, wind, water, and of course including people.
Right.
And we only know so much. They according oral history, I think 500 AD or something like that. But the non-instrumental navigation,
Yeah.
the knowledge of the Hawaiian, the Polynesians to get there, and those trade routes and that migration is really incredible. And that's something that they're really trying to reinstitute that knowledge as well with Hokulea
Mm.
That's the Pacific Voyaging Society. They're actually about to start their second worldwide voyage. They're in Alaska as we speak for
Cool.
the beginning of this. It's going to be a 3-year worldwide voyage,
Wow.
and they had recently completed, I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the first worldwide voyage using all non-instrumental navigation,
Mm.
multiple crews, and with a support boat. And that's actually what got me interested in the Princess Taiping and that voyage, was seeing that, and just that, primitive but very that knowledge that, we're all like, you go back to some of those just primal skills, and whether it's connection to place or just ways of living. I just find it really interesting. And
Yeah. When I was going through recon school in Kentucky, I used stars to navigate a lot at night, and the reason was really
cool.
practical for me because in order to look at a map, I've got to pull out a tarp and get it completely sealed off so that I can turn on a light and I can't have any light getting out of it. Navigating with a lensatic compass at night is still challenging. We had iridium in the compass, so it glowed no matter what. And also, if you turn on a light, you've destroyed all your natural night vision for quite a bit of time. So what was much easier for me to be able to make those night movements was just to look at my compass and get the heading that I needed and manage my pace count for distance. And then I'd look at Polaris, which is, an easy star to find, and like, okay, I need to be about this far to the left of it. And, I'm going to count 376 paces, and then I should be at my next waypoint, and I can reassess from there. And a lot of the instructors gave me a really hard time about that because it's really unconventional in modern military to do anything like that. And there's nothing fancy about what I'm doing. I'm not saying that I'm some kind of fancy celestial navigator. But for me, that was super, super practical because I could try and stay a little bit more aware of the trees that I was going to run into and the wildlife that was around, and not to get observed by whatever oppositional force was against us. And unfortunately, a lot of those skills, would be lost if not for the efforts of the groups like what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Yeah, just some of those basic, you really have to be present, just like when you're out there sailing, to everything that's happening around you. And when you're paying attention, we actually, we used a GPS, we had AS receiver, so we had some of those comforts.
Yeah.
That was about it.
Yeah.
We didn't barely had a motor. We had a 10 horsepower little diesel engine in the back that wouldn't do anything in a strong current.
Sure.
Let alone in the seas. That was mostly for when we got into harbor.
Yeah.
But just, when you're out there and you're observing what the weather's doing, where the swells are coming from, seeing birds, that's where they're coming, what kind of birds they are.
Mm-hmm.
And just really being attuned for that, because your life depends on it. But also, it's just I really enjoyed that,
and
still enjoy it. You
Yeah.
know, like what you were doing. That's kind of the same thing. When I only got to be on that boat a couple times, but being with some of those navigators from Hokulea. That's what they're doing. They're looking at those stars first thing when they're visible, or when the sun comes up, sun goes down, and they determine their course, and then they adjust when they can see that again. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. It's not complicated, but it requires this special skill of recognizing patterns that I think is fairly unique to humans. It's something that we can measure our intelligence by, is our ability to recognize patterns and then make predictions based off of that. And it's a fascinating thing. And I say human because it's something that's still in us. So Like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm guiding a trip where we're out for a few days, especially if we're out of cell service and people don't have access to their inReach, their phone's not working, whatever, they immediately start to notice that stuff. They start to look up and see like, well, what does that cloud mean? And oh, I noticed that the wind just changed direction. Stuff that they would never ever pay attention to in an urban setting at all. So I think it's in us. Like we've got the
Yeah.
programming
Yeah.
to be able to pay attention to that and use it for deductive reasoning. Uh, but yeah. So tell me about the Princess Taiping.
So the Princess Tiaping was a voyaging society, much like the Hokulea is, which is a Pacific voyaging society based out of Hawaii, that was started by a man named Nelson Leo from Taiwan. And really the goal was him and some others, but was really just to revive and restore pride, but also a sense of, this maritime, a stronger sense of history, and just of this maritime history, but really an ocean going people who spent time out on the water sailing, the way he said it and what he told me is that, look at today in Southeast Asia and even in those outlying islands, particularly around China, people don't go in the water.
Mm.
They don't swim. And in the ocean, there's no one sails, and of course surfs. Could be deep sea fishing outside of commercial activities, and there's many reasons for that. I'm not an expert on any of that. I think there's some things that happen with changing of dynasties, and there's some books about that post, Zheng He, like his sailing, his world expeditions or trading and transition of power. There's war, and then there are things even on Taiwan. He had told me that when they're families not wanting their kids to go to the beach or out on the water for fear that there might be an attack, and
Right.
so keeping kids or keeping your family safe.
Yeah.
So there could be any number of reasons, but for the most part, that's true. There is, I've been to Taiwan and there's people that surf and paddle, and there's an indigenous culture there as well. But the Princess Taiping, so that's what it was born of, and so Nelson, who'd sailed around the world a few times, was curious and really connected to his roots and wanted to, got the funds and the interest to put together this a plan to sail around the world in a replica ocean-going boat. And so we found this master shipbuilder from Fujian province, which is where most all those boats were built during the Ming Dynasty, when most of that sailing was happening and a lot of trade was happening across Asia.
Did they have the timber there to be able to build the boats? Is that
They had the
yeah.
timber in the mountains there, and just I think that's where the ports were. So it was
Okay.
a good location. It was commercial ports, a good point, for trade, good harbor, and then so that just became they were ocean water people there, and so we found this master shipbuilder who. That's something that's passed on next generation, and I've been told, he was one of the last ones there and had these, Ming or Qing dynasty blueprints of this Fuchuan, which is a Fujian style ocean-going boat from China, which is different. What I was telling you about earlier, the Guangchuan, which originates from around Guangzhou, which is a little bit further south down there.
Okay.
And so they went up and they went into the mountains, and the master shipbuilder, he'd go, okay, that tree, that's a good one for the bow right there, and okay, that one, that's good for this, and he knew exactly, what kind of wood he needed, and iron bamboo for the battens, a certain kind of acacia, certain kind of pine, just depended on what part of the boat. When they built the boat, they built it exactly like they would have, back in the 1600s, and they used an axe. When they used, like, for what's really interesting, even instead of artificial resins, they would use sap. For the sail, they used like sort of a fungal dye, or they same thing that would keep off like bacteria, keep getting moldy and mildew.
So cool.
Oh yeah, so cool. And even the nails, no screws,
Really?
nothing.
Yeah.
I believe, because some of them scratched up my leg, and it was all cast nails as well. So
were they a warring people?
as far as I know, so this boat, the Fuchuan, so they had different styles of boats. This was a messenger ship or a warship, is what you call it. This size of boat that we're on, which was 54 feet long, about 15, little over 15 feet wide, and would have been would have sailed around some of the different outlying islands. Wouldn't have gone too far, I don't think, by itself. Would have been accompanied by a much larger boat, 300 feet, maybe I've even heard 400 feet.
Wow.
Giant multi-deck ships.
That's a tremendous wooden vessel.
Tremendous wooden vessel. But this boat was used for war.
One of the things I bring up about Vikings a lot when we're talking about the weapons that they used to fight with, Vikings fought with hammers and axes. And we think of that like in popular culture of them going on the battlefield with that kind of stuff. What people tend not to think about is that those were the tools they used to build the boat to get there. Those were the tools they used to fell the timber to build the boat. Like if you went through all of that work with hammers and axes, you would know better than anyone else in the world how to use a hammer and an axe.
Use that axe. That's right.
Like
that's
you don't want to fight a carpenter that has a framing hammer in his hand. Like you're definitely going to lose that one.
Yeah.
And I find that really, really interesting because it doesn't cross over to other types of warfare, right? If you have a cavalry unit, they're probably not going to be using the same tools that they were, herding their horses with back on the steppe someplace. So if you ever come across a warfighter who's using a tool to fight that war that he uses in his everyday life, like just go ahead and like talk it out, because that's not one that you want to go up against.
Probably the better the craftsmanship, the better the warrior too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Otherwise they're not going to get there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, our boat, the boat I was on, which was the exact replica, I didn't see any, our boat, I didn't see any designs that probably could have accommodated, cannons or anything. Definitely this one wouldn't have been large enough for that, but I think some of the larger ones did. So this is the one that was faster, could go ahead, or be involved in trade.
Right.
The other thing, with this boat, I mentioned the Guangchuan, the Fuchuan. The design of the boat is it didn't have a keel. Most modern sail and Western sailboats, they have a keel.
Incredibly heavy keels.
Incredibly heavy and deep keels.
Yeah. They weigh thousands and thousands of pounds, made out of lead. Yeah.
Yeah, and this boat did not. We have ballast, which would.
So is that just rocks you're throwing?
Just rocks. Just rocks.
Yeah.
Stones. In our case, stones. Big stones at the bottom. And the back end of this boat is very high. Our draft was around 7 feet, but the aft of the boat was very high out of the water, square, and then kind of sloped forward, bowed forward, and then came up kind of high out of the water up front.
Okay.
And that design of the boat was really helpful when there was, big water, big swells, waves that would break. If you had the boat right, it would actually kind of push you as well. So the design was unique and different than anything I'd experienced before. And then also when you're when you were sailing, it just kind of had a very just kind of rocked back and forth, just slow back and forth. Even if you had, depending on how your sails were set, it would still do that. It wouldn't necessarily hold the line that you would have if you had a keeled boat.
Interesting. Yeah, so I mean, a drift boat uses similar technology with the amount of rocker. It lifts in the bow and the stern, and that allows us to move through rapids really gracefully. Some of the most graceful whitewater boats you'll see will be drift boats and dories that have that design, and you do get to move through them pretty gracefully. Whereas with a raft, they're just a big dumb animal that's just going to slam into everything and kind of rubber its way through stuff.
Yeah, the rocker actually wasn't too great on that boat.
Okay.
It did have a rocker in the front, but in the back, the Guangchuan had a little bit more, but lower, sat lower out of the water. So I think the combination of the two, having that nice rocker to just kind of help you glide, you're not going to dig into waves, but have a little bit of lift in the back. But also, like a dory, in a sense, it can, you're not just going to be, or if something, comes anywhere in your aft, it's not going to just completely engulf you.
How many crews on the boat?
When I was on the boat, there was 11 of us.
Okay. Presumably you were on shifts, so how many people would it take to sail at any given time?
Yeah, so we were on shifts of 6 on, 6 off.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 5 on, 5 off every 6 hours.
Yeah.
So depending on, I think my crew, I can't remember, we had 5 or 6 on our shift. And my shift was with the first mate, Lao Tong, who actually, this is really interesting. He still sailed not one of these boats, but a Guangchuan, an original, which is very rare. And he lived around Fujian province, and that's how they found him. Like, you need to be on this voyage.
Yeah.
And he'd never gone off, deep ocean, but knew how to rig and, was just an incredible sailor and waterman. So that's 6 on, 6 off, 6 to 12, 12 to 6.
Is that a pretty sustainable schedule over the long term? Like, you're never getting your full 8 hours of sleep,
You're
obviously.
not. I really liked it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Some people, I was just reading the last sail around Cape Horn, and, I think they were on shifts of 4. That's not enough. 6, you get just enough.
Yeah.
And it just depends what's happening. If conditions are good, you might even get to just kind of lie down when you're on watch,
right,
when you're up there. There's always things to do, but if things aren't going good, obviously you're on every single second. Every single thing you do really matters. And then when you're down below, you also might not sleep anyway,
sure,
because you're thinking about what might be happening.
Yeah.
And that's this boat. So you have the deck, and you have the kind of the poop deck area, which there was actually a poop area there you can go to the bathroom. And there was an area you could put an oar in the back, and then there's an area where you could put an oar on the side that was stored on the boat to help paddle you into harbors. And then you had the captain's quarter. Then you had the area with the rudder and the tiller right there, which is one heck of. So we had that thing tied up with mechanical advantage.
Yeah.
Well, with rope.
Yeah.
Because you had this giant rudder that sat out of the water and then went into the water, and so no man could hold that by himself. And then captain's quarter, first mate's main deck, and then up front near the bow. And then you had down below, you had where the crew slept, and each slot, so it's about 4 on each side. It's basically like a little coffin down there. You climb down in something like this, about 3 feet high, 3 feet wide. And that's another comfort that we had, is we brought some, just like some tarps down. We were allowed to put in a tarp and kind of wrap it around us, so at least we could stay a little bit drier, because water would come down.
Sure.
but for the most part would stay. It was pretty dry down there.
How did the pumps work?
So there we did have a bilge at
Okay.
the bottom, but we only used that once if a lot of water got in the boat. It was very tight.
Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
And then so in that middle compartment, you would have we kept water there, and then food behind us where the crew slept, and then up forward deck there, down below, more food supplies and other supplies, and then down below you had the ballast down there.
How long was the voyage?
So the voyage itself was about a year. I myself was on the boat because it sailed from Taiwan, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, across the North 45, went as high as 47, over to Seattle, down to San Francisco, Seattle, over to Hawaii, and that's where I joined.
Okay.
There were 5 of us from Hawaii, and we joined. It was an international crew. Captain Nelson and Angela from Taiwan, Lao Tong from Fujian province, myself, Jack Durham, Jason, Liz, John, and Carlo, actually 6 of us originally. And then there was a couple that joined us from Japan on the final leg. That was Mori-san and Kinjo-san, who sailed another traditional sailing vessel out of the Japanese islands, the Sabani.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I joined from Hawaii and just sailed on the boat about two and a half months,
Mm-hmm.
from mid-February to the end of April.
That's a long time to be confined to a 54-foot vessel.
It's a long time to be
Yeah.
confined on a 54-foot vessel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just got to tell you the story how I got on this boat. I was paddling. I was on an outrigger. I was paddling with some friends on a canoe,
Mm-hmm.
6-man canoe, and we paddled in to the harbor near Alawai, and we look over like, what is that thing in the water? Never seen a boat like that.
Sure.
I'd seen Hokulea, much different design, obviously from an outrigger, but the guy steering just immediately puts his paddle in the water, and we paddle over next to the boat, and Lao Tong was sitting up there, and I speak some Chinese, so I just started talking to him like, what is this? And, man, we're it's a worldwide voyage, and we're staying here for a couple weeks, and then we're gonna sail, complete the voyage and sail into Taiwan. And he said, we need some crew. And so a friend of mine, Jason and myself, we went the next day and just kind of shared some of our experiences, just being, ocean people, being out on the water, and really just, sharing the way it could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then got on the boat. But
How old were you?
29.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a mature human being, but you've still got some sense of adventure and a little bit of invincibility.
Yeah, I always wanted to, sailing across the Pacific is something that I always wanted to do.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Vikings a few times, but I'm of Scandinavian descent.
Which anybody that looked at you for a quarter of a second could probably figure out.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people, it's kind of on their bucket list to do something like that. And ever since at that time, I was volunteering for Hokulea. I'd go down to the harbor and help out with whatever tasks they needed me. We'd go out I went out on a few sails on that boat, and just really thought, going back to what we were talking about initially, that knowledge was just so cool, and just wanted to participate in something like that. And so this came up, and was just like, right, that's where I was at that time. And so then got on the boat. And when you get on that boat, and when we left harbor, there's a big sending off party. At the time, this voyage was initially funded by National Geographic, and then there was got a lot of press at each port we'd stop by, which is the whole point of it.
Right.
This is something we want to revive. We want more people to be out there in the water and just and so we got sent off, and I remember looking back at Oahu and looking at the boat, and I was like, oh well, we're in this.
Yeah.
And as soon as you leave Oahu, you're heading west, and you're bouncing off. There's a lot of action happening there because you have the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and so almost immediately, we had pretty good swells, coming from a couple different directions, and had to learn how to sail that boat pretty quick.
Yeah. I wish everyone could have the experience of going out to sea at least far enough that they can't see land anymore.
Yeah, you can't just get off the boat.
Yeah.
You're there, and and not just by yourself. You're there with the other people on the boat too.
Right.
You have to, whether you like, the person next to you, not, you got to work with them to make it. And that wasn't the case on the boat. Everyone got along, but you depend on each other. You're looking out for each other, as there are many things that happen on that voyage where people were looking out for me, looking out for, there's a lot of different stories, besides just when you're on watch together. You're on the tiller together, on the stick there, and looking out at weather, keeping watch for other boats. You have to, the foresail, one of the sheets is caught on there, and you're trying to get it off. There was one night I was trying to get one of the lines or the sheets off the foresail, and one thing I've been told not to do a few times by more seasoned sailors is never hang on tight to that thing. And I was always pretty good, but really strong, strong winds, not gale force, probably a night where there's like 30-mile-an-hour winds or something, but it caught. I was trying to get the sheet around so that just, you're always thinking about efficiency when you're sailing.
Right.
Wind caught the other side. I was still hanging on. Middle of the night, my grip was tight enough. I was holding on that rope, and it swung me across deck. I slammed into the other side of the deck, and luckily let go. And foresail, now was on starboard side. I was still inside the boat, but just thinking, I could very well be outside. No one would ever find you again. But there was someone right there still looking out for me. That would have known that I was there. There's really nothing we could have done. And that's the one thing about this boat is, it's really hard to turn around.
Yeah.
So it's very much a down sail. It's very much meant for sailing downwind.
Okay.
And tacking is good. Jibing is death.
Yeah.
But stern's very heavy.
Yeah.
It's the sail, big wide. I don't know if you saw a couple beautiful big wide sail but if that thing swung around, so heavy, it could potentially rock the boat if the seas were wrong, and you could capsize and flip over. So to turn around on a dime just was not possible. You basically, as Captain said, don't go in the water.
Yeah, right. Because by the time you get the boat turned around to come back to look for somebody that's overboard, they might be very hard to find.
Yeah, it's already hard enough to see someone out there in the water or anything. Realize I'm kind of all over the place here, but just, you're bringing up, I'm tacking.
Yeah.
You're bringing up a lot of just memories of this boat. And one thing that was really, speaking of the sails, that was really neat about the design of the boat, that I don't think there's any sails made like this anymore. It's probably because it's too heavy.
Yeah.
But there was cord, there's little squares in the sail that would each capture wind and harness the wind. And so you had cord in between that would make up these squares, and then you had battens of bamboo, this iron bamboo. And what was neat about that, so if something happened to that sail, and there was a rip, it would confine it to that space.
Right.
It would not go beyond that space. And I would say, 18 inches or so, or about that size. So that was one thing, and I just love seeing those things just fluff.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the battens being ironwood and having wood and not having these synthetic materials. And sure, you can patch and repair. People do it all the time. But if something did break, because it did happen, if we had a big wind, big storm come through, and one of those battens broke, we could actually repair it on the boat because we had spare bamboo on the boat above the main deck. And so we'd go there, we'd climb up and tie it up. And then, we're able, most everything we could do because it was much simpler.
Yeah.
In a way.
Huh. Did you get any real bad weather?
We did, yeah. Have you ever been on open ocean?
I have.
So you've probably been
not terribly far out, like Gulf Stream, East Coast.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 70, 100 miles.
Yeah. So that's you've been out on open ocean. It's just a whole different beast than the near shore, the big swells.
Yeah.
Even on a calm day, you can be with good wind, there'll be 3 to 5 foot swells, and all of a sudden, you see a 30, 40 foot monster come out of nowhere from Alaska, from the Aleutian Islands, because something dropped in the bottom of the ocean floor.
Right.
And you think it's going to swallow you and just kind of lifts you up and then comes down. And then you have the storms that happen out there, and you're always watching, okay, what's going to come? How, should we just go through this? Or are we going to, you're watching the clouds, watching the fronts. And there was one time we were in a few thunder, lightning storms, but there was one that was just, those can be terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you're out there and the clouds look like they're, 12 feet high. Our mast is about 70 feet high. So they look, they're about 100 feet up, but really they're, maybe half mile up, but it's just a solid ceiling of clouds and lightning bolts just coming down all around you. And the thunder is so loud, it hurts your chest.
Mm-hmm.
And the rain's coming down, and, you don't think you're going to make it through the night. Your ship's going to be destroyed. And then 8 hours later, it's beautiful.
Right.
And you're like, oh, this is great. And then there's a couple days of gale force, winds. There was particularly on the day leading up to before the wreck, we had there was a big storm and gale force winds that came through, big seas, 15, 20 foot seas, and not just coming, from one direction, because at that time it was no longer open ocean, and we're within different islands. So then you have wave or swells coming from 2 different directions, which is really challenging.
It's awful.
It's awful. Yeah. And because there's really no way, particularly if you're trying to get somewhere, and then you then you could get way off course.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter what, you're going to have, even if you sail beautifully, we had during that storm, we had mainsail reef down, just two battens, trying to move just around, 3 to 5 knots or something like that. It's still, it's awful. Like then you can't see. That was at night too. I saw, there's during the daytime, it's not as bad because you can actually see stuff coming, but at night you hear stuff coming, and so you just hear it, and then you just get ready and brace yourself, and you just try not to wash over shore.
Wash over the deck?
Offshore the deck.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if a big Taiwan, big wave comes, it just come over and knock you off. And we had jack lines, and we could clip ourselves in. But most of the time, I didn't use that just because limited mobility. But there is that option to clip yourself in for things like that. But as you know, like on the river, you have more cords and ropes lying around that. Right. That's just cannot be a good situation sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of my life with these more kinetic things, you don't want to be attached.
Yeah.
But with a ship on open ocean, it's a little bit different scene because everywhere else is worse, probably.
Yeah.
There's times when it's not, which we'll get into. But yeah, that's a common enough thing. And with a lot of the things that I've done, it's like, hey, don't ever find yourself attached, wrapped up around rope. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't ever do this because you don't want to go down with it. When we rappelled out of helicopters to fight fire, you had a ripper knife on your rappel harness, and it was like a big letter opener. They could cut through the rope really quickly. And the spotter who controlled the rappels from the aircraft, they had one too. And if you were rappelling, if you're on the rope coming 250 feet down, probably into a wilderness area that's on fire, if the helicopter had a problem, no matter where you were on that rope, the spotter was going to cut that rope off because it was going to be better for you to free fall 250 feet or less than to get dragged by a 250-foot rope by that helicopter as it was, crashing or doing something on the way to a crash.
Wow.
So it was always something that was in the back of my mind when I would step out on the skid of that aircraft, and you make eye contact with that spotter and they give you the signal to rappel. My eyes always went to that knife, and I'm getting to the ground fast, as fast as I possibly can, because I do not want to be attached to this thing, and I also don't want to get cut off.
Yeah, man. And that's going on to land,
Right.
too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened is you guys got close to Taiwan.
Yeah. So we stopped by Wake Island.
Okay.
Went from Wake Island to Saipan, Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And Okinawa, last part of the voyage, supposed to be kind of the victory lap. And so at this point, nearly over 5,000 miles.
Yeah. So you're like on a World War II island hopping tour.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We went. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all those islands, the history there, both military, and then most particularly when we got to Saipan forward, people would come out in the communities and they'd show these old paintings of this boat that their grandmother had told them about,
Wow.
or great grandmother. This boat, there's oral history at these places of these boats sailing in and out, and now there was one, in the harbor. So that was neat, and so we were expecting same thing in Okinawa, and had a few days off there, and then we're sailing. Picked up Kenjo-san, Mori-san, and Thomas Cook, who is a professor from Humboldt State University, for this final lap. And at that time, I think there was 13 on the boat. And we, as I mentioned earlier, that's when we hit the gale. And looking at the map, and it's probably a little bigger than the size of Taiwan. So it was a big storm.
Gale's anything over 40 knots?
Over 60.
Over 60 knots.
I believe over 60, yeah. And this thing came ripping. I mean, I was on the stick during the daytime when it first was coming our way, and this wall was incredible. I mean, it turned into, before that happened, it was just everything what we thought it was supposed to be. We're catching fish. We got ono, and I think we got some ahi, and we're cutting it up, doing sashimi, and just everything's going great. And then you just see this wall come, and it just comes ripping and just picks up quick. Seas built quickly. And then so we really had to kind of dig down and do what we had to do to sail safely. And,
yeah. Is that an all hands on deck kind of thing? Or?
No, we're still doing 6 on, 6 off. Really it's also less. It would be okay to have that many bodies above deck.
Yeah.
But also, having the people that you want on the tiller, on the stick there, and always checking the line, having someone checking the lines, having someone be on lookout for other boats, and storms happening. We have these swells from different directions. just our aft, and then aft quarter there. We're heading 270 degrees was, and our intended port was Keelung Harbor out of Taipei in the north there in Taiwan. But we were unable to do this just because of the direction of the swell. It just made it really difficult. We thought we could maybe do it. A big wave came in and actually broke one of the. It was like a railing on a deck that could be pulled up. It had some really thick, like 3-inch boards there that, and so water was able to get on the deck. So we really didn't want to be exposed on our starboard side, and that was probably just a couple feet, a section there that was like a gate.
Yeah.
So, we decided with that, and then also we were wing and wing at that point, and I believe Maine was on port side, 4 was on starboard side, and then we reefed those, just had it down, to a couple battens, and on the mainsail there, and we decided to change course. It just was too dangerous, and wouldn't have been able. It would have been really tight to make it there. So we decided to change course and went to Suao, which is a little bit farther south in Taiwan. And by this time, I think we were able to even do some radio. We did have a radio, VHF, of course, on the boat. And we didn't have an escort boat for this voyage. It was just us, just our boat. And so we're heading towards Suao, and probably 27 nautical miles off from our destination, heading at around 240 when the accident happened. And we had seen this boat, so there was off in the distance, about 11 o'clock, about an hour before. We had an AS receiver, so we could see this boat. There was a tanker coming, and so this actually was a shipping lane. So it's something we knew, been in that situation before. This is an area you got to be careful. Higher traffic, than other areas, and so we'd been watching that, and then about a half an hour after that, Jack, who'd been on watch back there's about 3 others with me. I was on the stick, and Lao Tong and I were kind of switching off, and on our watch, and he said again that those, I can see both the running lights. This isn't looking good. And then probably 10 minutes after that, Lao Tong ran up to me, and he let me know that the AS receiver was showing that we were on a collision course. And so I had him take over the stick, and I went up near the captain's quarters. Captain was off during this time, and so he was actually asleep. Been a long few days for all of us. And so I went up there, saw we were on a collision course, and when I got up there too, because I could kind of see, but it was really getting urgent, because they could see. I mean, it became something where it was just 2 running lights to you can actually see in the night, little or no light, new moon, you could see kind of the outline of the ship, and still appeared to be heading to the aft of us, but close enough. There's kind of alarms going off, and so I went and got the captain. And Captain, we gotta communicate with the ship. And so he grabbed the VHF, started communicating with their captain. I grabbed the spotlight, and I was on the main deck, and turned on the spotlight. We had a solar panel on the boat, so we could use power for things like this. Shone the spotlight on the mainsail, and then at the boat as well, mainsail of the boat. And then our captain, communicated with the captain of that tanker, which is Champion Express, and let him know that we're on collision course. And for some reason, and this, there's still things like we don't know, he wanted to try to pass on, and when you communicate like that as a sailing vessel, you let the other vessel know that, this is sailing vessel Princess Tiaping. We're on a collision course, because there's obviously, you can't just, certain things you can't do.
Right. And it's worth mentioning that a sailing vessel has the right of way.
Sailing vessel has the right of way. And for one reason or the other, not long after this, a lot of things were happening at that time. The boat, and this is the thing, there's two things, that I've always had, two nightmare situations. And, one was getting, being out in the open sea and getting run over by a tanker. The other, you might relate to is, being out on an open field somewhere and being at like no place to hide, no shelter. Because both of those situations, if you got hit or, by a tanker, there's nothing you can do. There's nowhere you can go.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the tanker's rocking back and forth and back and forth, and then it just starts turning. I mean, you could just see it to where, because by that point, you could just kind of see the port side running light. You could, before you kind of see one, and then it just started rocking back and forth and back and forth, and turned, and then just turned towards us, and then we were just, everyone was screaming at the boat, obviously, which can't hear us. What are you doing? Why are you turning? Why are you heading this direction? Because actually, it would have missed us. And that's one of those things. Hindsight, maybe if we wouldn't have called out, it wouldn't have tried to turn and tried to pass us on the port side. But it just, that large 600-foot plus tanker hit us right in square astern on the port side.
Ugh.
And so I was right there, and right before it hit, I just couldn't believe that this was happening, that I'm about to get nailed by a tanker on this 54-foot boat. And so I dropped the spotlight and grabbed on to the starboard side of the captain's quarters. There were some posts there. Grabbed onto that. I don't know what that would do. Actually, did not end up being a good decision. And it picked us up and broke the boat in half. So the bow of the boat went one way. We were on the stern of the boat. We went another way. And another, interesting thing about that too is it would, if not for World War II, and they put on these bulbs on the front of tankers.
Right.
That was for.
It improves efficiency, doesn't it?
It improved. That's why they kept it on.
Yeah.
But it was actually for sonar.
Oh,
I believe.
Yeah.
And so they discovered that it improved efficiency for the tankers, so they kept them on. If they did not have that on there, it probably would have just buried the whole boat. Might still broke us apart, but it lifted us up enough to where, there are thoughts in my mind too when this is happening. We're going to be sucked under the boat, chopped up by the props. So that, in combination with the fact that we were, the boat broken in half. I mean, I can still see it right there. I could see the top of the deck, and then got pushed underwater. And then, probably because it was a wood boat, went back up. So then we could see, and then came back up above water. You're right up against the hole here. Could still see the top of the deck there. Went back down, and that happened twice. Came back up one more time, and then 3 times. And the third time, my hand actually got stuck because I was there near the captain's quarters on the jack line, and right here, and so I couldn't make it to the surface. And so, I just before that time, I'd actually been reading this book, or maybe even saw a movie about that the kid in Utah who cut off his arm. And so I was thinking about that under there. This sounds silly, but everything's happened slower in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to rip off my, I was just going to do everything I could to try to rip off my thumb because I could not make it to the surface. And
Did you have a
luckily,
knife on you?
I did have a knife on me. It was in my jacket.
Okay.
I didn't soon after, which another mistake I made in that situation. So I came up, just it tore, all the skin off my thumb, is bone, but look, somehow like got up, and that section actually was not that far underwater. I just couldn't get my head above water.
Doesn't take much.
Doesn't take much. And then looked around, and just saw what was amazing though is I was underwater and I was just wearing one of those water resistant headlamps, battery, AA, AAA. It was still working.
Yeah. So at least you can see. You can see as you're drowning.
See as I'm drowning, see the chaos, blood on people, blood on the captain, all over the captain's face there, debris in the water. And then, immediately after kind of orientating myself, my friend Jason was right there. And it's amazing. There were 3 under the deck when this happened. And that's one of those things in that, one of them was my best friend.
Yeah.
And they heard what was happening and they came up, but, just the wherewithal to make sure that everyone, was safe and ready for that. But they all made it up in time and they were right there. And so Jason, I had helped register one of the EPIRBs. We had a 48-hour EPIRB, emergent position indicator response beacon, and we had a 24-hour one. And so immediately I had the headlamp on, called to my friend that, we need to find this EPIRB now.
How did you get your thumb out?
I just tore it out.
Okay.
Just tore it out.
Yeah.
It was stuck on the line.
Yeah.
And it felt like a piece of wood.
Yeah.
And just got lucky and was able to pull it out.
But you still got your thumb.
Still got my thumb. And, the other thing is, there's a main artery that runs right there too. So definitely, probably wouldn't have survived if I would have been successful at what I was trying to do.
Right.
So then we found, first we found the 24-hour EPIRB. And at this time, the captain's quarters, it was right there. So we're sitting kind of floating around in the hole and on the side of the back hole of the boat there in the stern of the ship. The captain's quarters was kind of there, and that thing now, a wave came through and knocked that off. And so, all the books and, navigation equipment and everything else was just all in us. And keep in mind, we're still in the middle of a storm. And so every now and then,
kind of like
right wave,
now.
Just like right now,
this
outside.
This is a terrific thunderstorm we've got going on right now. I doubt people can hear it, but it is crushing us right now.
Yeah. I mean, it was like this. And but we needed to find, we had that 24-hour one, but I just really want to make sure we could find that 48-hour EPIRB. And so we're just, we're digging in the water, and, probably another wave or two. When the waves came, you were underwater, but what was incredible is all that stuff was still kind of right there. It didn't wash out immediately. And we found the other EPIRB, the larger one. And so I handed the 24-hour to captain. Then I had the 48-hour there. And then we just all start at that point. It's head count, who's here, who's injured, who's not here. And while this was happening, you talked about the rope and ocean being a little bit safer. Probably not in this case because we had this debris and we're kind of trying to stay next to the hull. So Captain Jack, who wasn't the captain but a captain himself, he cut some cord, about a 30-foot piece for us to all hang on to, so we could
stay together.
Stay together. And then we realized that just prior to this, after head count, we were missing Tom, the professor from Humboldt State, and we were missing Kenjo-san, who's one of the crew members from Okinawa. Kenjo-san was on the fore of the deck, and Tom, I knew, was astern, and he was actually sitting up on the poop deck. And so he got flung he thinks, into the hull of the tanker, had a contusion on his head, cracked his vertebrae, broke his arm. Like, I mean, he was really messed up, and he was just floating out there. He said he couldn't move anything, and but he had his PFD on, and it also had a kind of a beacon on it as well. It has strobe light, little flasher there, and so we're calling out to them, and then we just saw this light kind of rise and disappear, rise, disappear, and he said that after a while, one of his legs started working, or one of his legs in his arm, but he could just kind of hear us. And so that kind of helped him just kind of try to kick to our direction. He said water would go all over him, but for the most part, these are just swells with, there's caps that come on top. And he got close enough to where John Hunter actually went out and swam, it was probably 50 feet, but, away from the group, and got him. This might have been a half-hour time just for that to happen. And then realized he was really not in good situation, and brought him in and did our best to stabilize him in those conditions, and were able to do more so when daylight came. There was a section of the stern, because we were probably, that was railings probably a foot out of water there, and we were just kind of around that. So we're trying, and then Kinjo-san we never found. And then the other thing is, after that wreck, because we were in communication, we figured the tanker would stop, and it did. We could see it, and this is probably the worst part, of that, because you could see all the lights came on. It just kind of slowly moved, and for not just like 5 minutes, like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and not too far off from us. And you're thinking they're going to lower the boats and come down, and then it took off, and so we knew we were there, by ourselves. And another reason, the EPIRB was so important. So we made it through the night.
Holy shit!
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was, and then the other thing about our situation, we were lucky. This is right before monsoon season, so that's why we're really in a big push to get to Taiwan before we had hurricane come through there. But we're also in the Kurashio Current, which is one of the fastest moving currents, I've been told, in the world, or at least for that part of the world. It travels, I think 3 knots, maybe more, 5 knots.
Which direction is it going?
It's heading north. So that's not a direction we want to be heading. It's not going to take us to any land. So we're there. We make it, we make it to morning, which at that time, I think 4:30 a.m. daylight. We got hit around 2:30, 2:40 a.m. And it was amazing. One thing I tell people, and you've probably been in a few situations like this, but it was incredible how people work together even in that situation. Because, we have, most people, I think, would assume that, people are pitted against each other, and the worst comes out in us, right?
Every man for himself.
Every man for himself.
I think you just become more of what you are. So some people, they become selfish, and others do not.
Yeah, I guess I was just with the right crew, because I got knocked loose a couple times, and I'm trying to hang on the EPIRB, and one of the worst things I did, I'm talking about the knife, I always had a knife on me there, always, and but it was in my jacket, and I hucked my jacket because it was too hard to wear that in the water. I just felt I didn't feel mobile enough. But John Hunter, right next to me, did have his, which we use that a lot.
Yeah.
Always keep your knife on you.
Yeah.
Even if you're floating in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
And same thing. People working to help um, the professor, as he's got a broken neck and contusion, looking purple, like he's not going to make it. And just even food planning, what's happening here, helping each other move around. But until morning, when morning came, which really was only 2 hours later, probably 3-4 hours later, things really, the wind died down, but you still had the big swells and caps that came. But was really starting to think, we might be out here a while. We had like just a little bit of water that we found before everything washed off in that storm.
Which is one of the most common ways that people die who've been shipwrecked.
Water.
Yeah.
And food, not so important, but we found like a bag of oatmeal that was in plastic or something like that, some sort of grain.
Yeah.
So we hung on to that. And then there's you're always wanting to do more and help out, and not really fully kind of being present in our situation. One time, I looked over at Jason and said, I'm going to dive down, because we had a life raft in the middle of the boat. I said, I'm going to dive down and I'm going to go get that boat. I'm going to go get that life raft. I said, Larz, man, that boat is gone with the rest of our ship.
Yeah.
It's not here. You can't go get that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. So anyway, so we're out there and, just hoping for the best, kind of probably, a lot of people being quiet, moving around. There's a lot of those nails that were around our section of the ship. There's that tiller, which is still connected to the rudder, which is around us, incredibly dangerous as well, because that thing was moving with the water.
Yeah.
A couple times, a few of us got outside that kind of protected area, being in the water there, but then we're thinking, a lot of us had blood on us, and so we're thinking about sharks. And
right, you're not terribly far from where the USS Indianapolis went down, right?
Yeah, I'm not. Where did that go down?
I mean, it might still be a long ways off, but they delivered the bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they were sunk by, I think, a Japanese submarine. By torpedoes regardless, but over 1,000 men were killed by sharks.
Wow.
It's really, really awful thing. So this has to be on your mind, right? You're shipwrecked, there's blood in the water.
There's blood in the water, and, you don't know. Everyone's just trying to keep each other safe.
Yeah.
And then, oh gosh, I don't know.
Were you able to be out of the water at all?
No.
So you're up to your neck
up
with
to
your
our neck,
PFD on.
And I actually, so this is another thing that I do share with people, because it was helpful for me. They have those PFDs that automatically inflate once you hit water. I chose not to get one of those because I knew I was going to be exposed to water, heavy rains, and I heard that's trouble.
Yep.
I did not inflate my PFD. I chose to manually have one that I can manually inflate mine.
Yep.
Just because of mobility reasons. And it was very, very helpful for me. And because I had debris to kind of hang on that might have been different. If I was just out there floating, I certainly would have done that. But with, pieces of wood around, we're in half the hole. But we're all submerged in the water, up to our head, shoulders, kind of hanging on to something there, which we were fortunate to have that. And then I'm going to say around, I think it was 7 hours later, we saw a frigate, and we were wondering, so you kind of call out, but there's nothing you can do. They can't see you. They can't hear you. And then not long after that, it kind of disappeared. We saw a white vessel, and which later we found out was the Coast Guard. The frigate, we never found out what that was. I still, one thing I was thinking is that might have been like a U.S. vessel that was out there that was in communication with our, because EPIRB signal, or that distress signal, gets sent to NOAA, which then sends it to the West Coast, which then send it to the Coast Guard. But maybe there was some communication coordinating there.
So is this the Taiwanese Coast Guard?
So this was, so then the U.S. Coast Guard got it on the West Coast, then sent it to the Taiwanese Coast Guard and the Taiwanese Navy.
So for information to change hands that many times and remain accurate is next to impossible.
Yeah. And that's, we've sent out the signal, but the fact of, for them to find us, on what is now, a 15 by 15, hunk of wood in the water is still very, very small chance.
That doesn't have any vertical profile, right?
No vertical profile. Still swells coming through. Good visibility now. Okay. We could see off in the distance, but still swell. So we're hidden. And then we saw a helicopter. And when we saw the helicopter, then really, our hopes are getting up, but still, you don't know what's going to happen. That every now and then we saw the white boat. It was obviously searching for something, but still, I forgot the visibility is. I think it's 4 miles you can see when you're standing up, but probably a couple miles off or something. Yeah. But same thing. Helicopter scanning, going back and forth, and then it stopped. And at this time, we're just it stopped. It disappeared, and so then we're wondering what's happening. And then it came back in view. I guess it had circled around, and dropped someone down. Like what, and then we're really, we're really worried then that it might have found some debris and would not know that we were still out there, and was going to assume the worst and call off the rescue mission. And it actually then came up, and it was we could see the outline even from where we're at, with another body coming up. So we just all started screaming because we knew that was Kinjo-san.
Right.
So what Kinjo-san did, this guy was amazing. I mean, still, he's one of the guys that would sail the Sabani and modern sailboats out of Japan. He took the foresail and was trying to sail that thing, this chunk of boat in the water. He was trying to sail it to Taiwan.
No kidding.
And this, I don't know how much success he had with that, but that's what he said. That's what he was trying to do. Because his...
so how many hours since you guys...
That mast was still out of the water.
How many hours since you guys wrecked at this point?
I think it was 6 hours.
So for 6 hours, he's been dead to you.
He's been dead.
Yeah.
And, that seemed like a whole lot longer time. I mean, there's people that have been out there and... for days, weeks, months. But, that felt like a lifetime to us, particularly, in our situation. And that was incredible seeing that. But still, again, didn't know if they were going to find us. And Kinjo-san later told us when they brought him up, said, where's everyone else? He said, they're dead.
Yeah.
I'm the only one left.
Right.
And so they very well could have called off the rescue mission as well. He could not communicate with them as well. He only spoke Japanese. The two folks I think that was Coast Guard that picked him up, only spoke Chinese. And so they probably understood dead, but they said, where are the others? And he just said they're gone.
Right.
Luckily, they kept searching and kept coming our way from those coordinates that were 5 hours old, because when they found us, we were 45 nautical miles from Suez. So we had already drifted 20 miles north. So they kept coming our way, and at that time, and this is another one of those kind of mystic things about that I think all seafarers and people that have been out on the ocean and you're that connected and ingrained in what you're doing. uh, there was a kind of a patron goddess of the sea that was on this boat um, called Matsu, and she's from Fujian province, and she's kind of all sailors from that part of the world have this have Matsu on their boat and should protect her, to help make sure that you return home safely. And she was in the cabin, and right about when this happened, up the cape that is on this Matsu that was inside this cabin on the boat floated to the top of the water. And it was a yellow cape about this big, and then we also had a yellow bucket that we had hung onto there. So we started waving this up. John stood on the rail. We kind of were holding him up right there, and then they saw us, and not right away, but they did eventually see us and pass by. Gave the thumbs up. But as you know, even once someone sees you, doesn't mean the rescue. I think 30% of fatalities happen during the rescue or something like that. It's a pretty high number.
Right, and helicopters can't stay in the air forever.
They can't stay in the air forever. We have no idea how far. I had no idea how far we drifted at that point. And what happened is, Tom looked like he was about to not make it, and they were able. And even for that guy to drop down of the helicopter around even some of our wreckage and lines in the water, sitting in the water there is also incredibly dangerous. But we were able to get Tom, he dropped board, about 30 feet out, and we were able to get him on and strap him and bring him up. And then we had Angela get up there as well, and then they for that same reason had to head back because they didn't have enough fuel, and they wanted to get him to the hospital as soon as possible. And so they dropped a smoke bomb there to mark our place. But then you're also wondering, are they going to find us? So they took off, and we were by ourselves again.
I bet it got real quiet.
It got real quiet. But, happy, even if, two people made it out, they were there. And we knew we were not told that was a Coast Guard boat, the white boat that was out there. So good chance that it saw that and was still heading our direction. But it had been quite a while since we'd seen that. And then they actually sent and then later, I don't know how much time after that, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then another helicopter came. It was a Navy helicopter, and it dropped down the metal basket. Have you ever been in one of those?
I've not been in them. I've sent people out in them before. Yeah.
It's about the size of a shopping cart.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine my 6-foot frame trying to hop in one of those, So by that time, I guess Jack went up in the first boat too, and so there was 4 of us left, or 5 of us left, because Captain was the last one. He stayed until that boat came, and there were 4 of us that went up in this Navy helicopter here. But that was not easy to get into. They came around, dropped down this basket, about 20, 30 feet from the wreckage. And, watching my friend Jason went there. He was about the same size as me. Went and tried to grab onto it and hop in, and they pulled it up before he was ready, and his thumb got caught in that. And he went about 20, 30 feet up in the air and was just hanging by it, and then was able to let go and then drop back down in the water, and then was able to get on. And then Lao Tong was able to get on. And I guess Mori-san, and then myself, and when I got on, by that time I was cramping up pretty bad too. I hadn't drank water just because of the 24 hours sailing before that, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't hydrating enough.
Right.
Wasn't eating salts, things like that. And so I was getting frustrated because I kept missing it. But finally, when it went underwater, I was able to grab the sides, slide in, and then gave them the thumbs up there. And then they, brought me up, and then was loaded on the helicopter, um, and then we flew back to Taipei, and they took us to the hospital.
Were you the last one up?
I was not the last. John Hunter was the last one up, um, and then after that, it was Captain Nelson, and then he stayed there till the boat came.
He stayed.
He stayed in the wreckage.
Okay.
Until the boat came.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, we all actually. There was still a little bit of the mizzen sail back there, and so right before, and that's one thing we were thinking about. We were talking about what we were going to do, and I was just thinking about materials that we had, but we took a piece of that sail and took it with us. It was just to remember. Because everyone survived, which is amazing. I mean, what could have been one of the worst situations you can find yourself in. I think it's just incredible that everyone survived on that boat, thanks to a lot of luck. Probably the boat being wooden, having the EPIRB, which we really, after this happened, we really tried to just use the press that we got to encourage just more like ocean safety and things that you can do. What helped us, but also raise awareness about things that happen out there on the open ocean, that because it's the Wild West out there.
Yeah.
And when I got back to Hawaii, I talked to other friends and merchant marines and things, and heard of stories of this also happening. But
Right.
a friend of mine, he talked about a boat they're on, and I think a whole family was killed. But they went down, they talked to the village, this off of Indonesia someplace, and also when it doesn't happen. And I did a lot of reading afterwards about similar stories where people get left out there, and there's a reason that the Champion Express is it's flagged. It was a Liberian flagged ship because there's no accountability there.
Champion Express was the freighter?
Champion Express was the freighter.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it's just, so we tried to use that that small platform that we had, post what was supposed to be a celebration of this worldwide voyage. And I still, the wreck was horrible. The fact that everyone went through that and the boat wasn't able to make it back and be put up in a museum or keep sailing and have kids go on it every week is really unfortunate. But the voyage itself, I think, was an incredible success for the way it did bring to light and hopefully revive some of that culture. And it was great. So
what kinds of leadership did the captain display during this time, for better or worse?
One thing I really appreciated is, I guess, how calm he was. I think that's so important, when you're in a situation like that. He had blood all over his face, and he wasn't doing everything, but he also wasn't freaking out.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really important, how everyone else reacts to that situation, because they're going to look to the captain, and to assess the situation and how they should be feeling. And then I one thing I appreciated too is when we saw Tom Cook out there floating, John Hunter, he was one of the stronger swimmers out there too, so he swam out, but captain, he went out there and swam and wanted to go help get him as well. So he put himself in situations, he could have had someone else ask someone else to go do that. So sort of, and there was some, obviously, I appreciated that he waited till the end and kind of that selfless leadership of making sure everyone's okay first before you're rescued. I mean, but those are things that really stood out to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what other lessons did you take from this?
Really, I think the biggest thing is certainly make sure if you're going on a voyage like that, you want to have, I mentioned this already, but having an EPIRB, is incredibly important.
Yeah. Have that red button.
We
have it on our phones now. Like the new iPhones have.
Oh, really?
Have a
I saw the SOS.
They have a
okay, I did not.
SOS.
So does that work for that?
That's what it's for. I kind of want to get a hold of the local dispatch and be like, hey, I'm gonna drop into the canyons and hit this thing.
Right.
Like,
would that work for that?
It's not real, but I want to know what happens. Like what's the communication that's received on their end, or where does it even go? But it's a tremendous thing, and we've got so much more accessible technology for all that now. There's Zoleo and InReach, and there's a lot of them out there so that we can, get help coming as long as there's sky above us.
Yeah. As far as there, going back to your question about lessons learned from this voyage, and particularly as it pertains, I guess, to survival, like in that situation, beyond just having that red button. I mentioned the knife, like I tossed that. Wasn't thinking, just trying to be as mobile as I could while I was in the water. Again, slowing down whenever in a situation like that, really being aware of where all your, whether you're on a boat or, it's a little different when you're out there, you're hiking around, but if, because you have everything there in your pack or on you. But, even, thinking back there, we had that rescue raft right there in the middle of the boat and just under deck. And if there would have been something else like that, and maybe there was that captain that I don't know about today, or that he might have told me before, but was also available above deck in case something happened suddenly like that.
Yeah.
And particularly when you're having to move that fast and react. And
that may have been a cosmetic thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's typically where life rafts are stored is above deck.
Right.
But I'm sure they wanted a specific image for what that boat was supposed to look like too.
Yeah. Well, and the size, the size of this boat, it really would have been difficult to have a life raft on there. And this one, you would have had to, you could have inflated it right there, had that with it. But having another one, on top of boat, and even like another small pack, maybe one on the foredeck and one back on the poop deck as well. I think that, that would, with basic provisions as well, that would have been helpful. And then, just general, and this is something I think everyone did well, mentioned besides the time when I forgot about that, our part of our boat was missing, but just staying, trying to stay as calm as possible in that situation so that you're thinking clearly and, aware of, others and what, folks need help and don't need help. But lots of learned lessons.
Yeah.
Particularly with, just in even sailing the boat, and, you really get into a flow out there. And as you said, just kind of attune with what's happening. So,
well, it's a tremendous story. I'm glad everybody made it.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody except for the boat.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, it's sad. There's one person who was on that, who was rescued with us, and a couple years later, he actually disappeared at sea, which is Kenjo-san, the one who was by himself out there, feisty sailor from Okinawa. He was delivering a boat by himself, and the boat washed up on shore and outside of Naha. So that was unfortunate, after to go through so much, and he had a daughter and a wife and all that. So
It's a dangerous game.
it's a dangerous game. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you for the story. And I think emergencies really show what and who people are, and we have a lot to learn from them afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Well done. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all of the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.